This video contains AI-generated narration and visuals. It is intended for educational and storytelling purposes only.
Delve into the shadows. Uncover the truth. This is FBI and CIA Unsealed.
Deep in the remote wilderness of Lincoln, Montana, a small, weathered cabin stood hidden among the pines. It was April 3rd, 1996, when a team of FBI agents quietly surrounded the property. Inside, 53-year-old Ted Kaczynski sat unaware, a reclusive man who had eluded capture for nearly 2 decades. The cabin held no electricity, no running water, just a typewriter, explosives, and the mind of a domestic terrorist. When the door burst open, the quiet life of America's most elusive bomber came crashing down. At just 16 years old, Ted Kaczynski entered Harvard University, a boy genius with an IQ of 167. But behind his brilliance was a socially withdrawn teenager, already uncomfortable in the modern world. In 1958, surrounded by ivy-covered walls and the brightest minds in America, Ted's life seemed destined for academic greatness. Yet, the seeds of disillusionment were already beginning to sprout. His professors praised his intellect, but classmates barely noticed a boy who would later become a terrorist. In his second year at Harvard, Ted Kaczynski became a subject in a controversial psychological study led by Dr. Henry Murray. The experiment was brutal. Participants were humiliated and psychologically attacked under the guise of stress tests. For over 200 hours, Ted was subjected to this mental torment, though he never spoke much about it. Some believe this was a pivotal moment that fractured his already fragile view of society, planting the early seeds of hatred toward the system. By age 25, Ted Kaczynski had earned a Ph.D. in mathematics and secured a teaching position at the University of California, Berkeley. His lectures were brilliant, his research admired, but his interactions with students were cold and distant. In 1969, after just 2 years, he abruptly resigned without explanation. Behind his academic success was a man growing increasingly disillusioned with modern life, yearning for something beyond the structured corridors of academia. After leaving Berkeley, Ted Kaczynski retreated from society entirely. He bought land in a remote part of Montana and built a tiny 10 by 12-foot cabin with no electricity, no plumbing, just isolation. It was here, in the silence of the wilderness, that Ted began crafting his anti-technology ideology. He lived off the land, hunted rabbits, grew vegetables, and spent hours writing in notebooks. But beneath this peaceful image, a storm of rage against modern civilization was beginning to take shape. On May 25, 1978, a small package was found at Northwestern University, addressed to a professor. When a campus security officer opened it, it exploded, injuring his hand. It was crude, made of scrap metal and wood. The sender? Unknown. This marked the beginning of a 17-year bombing campaign that would leave 3 dead and 23 injured. The FBI had no idea that the man responsible was living alone in a forest cabin, building bombs by hand. With no fingerprints or witnesses, the FBI was stumped. The bomber left no clear clues, only the signature crude bombs and taunting letters. Dubbed Unabomber, the attacker became a shadowy figure haunting universities and airlines across the country. The FBI launched one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in history, combining forensic science with linguistic analysis to track down the elusive bomber before he could strike again. In 1995, the Unabomber made a shocking demand. He would cease his bombings if a major newspaper published his 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The manifesto criticized technology's control over humanity and warned of societal collapse. Newspapers debated the risk, but ultimately published it, hoping someone would recognize the author's writing and help end the terror. Ted's brother, David Kaczynski, read the manifesto and noticed striking similarities to Ted's earlier writings. Torn between loyalty and justice, David faced a painful decision. Ultimately, he contacted the FBI, providing handwriting samples and private letters that helped identify Ted as the Unabomber. This courageous act set the final phase of the manhunt in motion. On April 3, 1996, armed FBI agents descended on Ted Kaczynski's remote Montana cabin. Inside, they found bomb-making materials, thousands of pages of journals, and detailed plans of attacks. At age 53, Ted was arrested without resistance, ending a nearly two-decade reign of terror. The evidence was overwhelming. The Unabomber's isolation had come to an abrupt end. Ted Kaczynski's manifesto revealed a radical philosophy. He believed technological progress was destroying human freedom and nature. His attacks were a violent protest against industrial society. Despite the horror he caused, his writings sparked debates about technology's impact on humanity, forcing the world to confront uncomfortable questions about progress and control. Ted Kaczynski's trial became a media sensation. Facing the death penalty, he initially wanted to represent himself, but eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid execution. In 1998, he pleaded guilty to all charges, receiving a life sentence without parole. The courtroom was filled with survivors, victims' families, and a nation eager for closure. Ted Kaczynski was sent to ADX Florence, a supermax federal prison in Colorado known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In near total isolation, he spends his days reading, writing, and reflecting on his actions. The man who once shook the nation now lived confined in a tiny cell. His impact felt more through his words than his bombs. Ted Kaczynski's bombs injured 23 people and killed 3 innocent victims. Survivors carried lifelong physical and emotional scars. Families struggled to understand why a stranger would target them in cold blood. Their stories remind us of the real human cost behind the headlines and the terrifying reach of a lone bomber. The key breakthrough in the Unabomber case came from linguistic analysis. FBI profilers studied the manifesto's unique language patterns, phrases, and spelling. This linguistic fingerprint pointed to Ted Kaczynski's background and writing style. It was a cutting-edge technique that helped law enforcement narrow their search and build a case. Long before the bombings, Ted Kaczynski wrote letters and essays echoing the same ideas found in the manifesto. These early writings, discovered by his brother David, helped tie Ted to the crimes. Phrases like the power process and critiques of industrial society matched word for word, proof that his ideology had deep roots. Inside Ted Kaczynski's tiny Montana cabin, FBI agents found a bomb maker's lair. Boxes of explosives, wiring, and detailed diagrams filled the space. Every item was carefully labeled, each component handcrafted. His journals revealed test results, targets, and philosophical ramblings, chilling evidence of a calculated and meticulous mind. The Unabomber case gripped the nation. Some feared him as a ghostly figure striking from nowhere. Others were disturbed by how closely his anti-technology message mirrored growing societal concerns. Books, documentaries, and news specials explored his life, blurring the line between criminal and philosopher and igniting public debate that still echoes today. On June 10, 2023, Ted Kaczynski was found dead in his prison cell at age 81. After years of isolation and illness, his life ended far from the wilds of Montana, where his dark legacy was born. His death closed a chapter of American criminal history, but the questions he raised about technology, control, and freedom continue to stir debate. Ted Kaczynski's legacy is one of terror, tragedy, and unsettling truth. His violence can never be justified, but his warnings about unchecked technological progress force reckoning. From academic prodigy to domestic terrorist, his story reminds us of the danger that isolation, ideology, and silence can grow. The Unabomber is gone, but his shadow still lingers in America's memory. If this story intrigued you, subscribe now to FBI and CIA Unsealed, where we uncover the most gripping true investigations, criminal minds, and covert operations. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. New episodes drop weekly. Real cases, real consequences.